Stalingrad, November 1942. Smoke hangs low over a shattered city. Buildings once filled with workers and families now stand as jagged silhouettes against the glare of distant flames. The bitter wind spreads the smell of dust, gunpowder, and frozen concrete. Every street, every stairwell, every broken wall is a battlefield. Across the Volga River, artillery thunder echoes like a heartbeat of destruction. German troops advance cautiously through the rubble, rifles raised, eyes searching the ruins. An officer signals his men forward, scanning windows darkened by soot and fire. Then, a single crack, a rifle shot, precise and merciless. The officer collapses before the sound even reaches his soldiers. They freeze. No movement, only the realization that someone is watching them. Hidden somewhere in the ruins, behind steel nerves and a telescopic sight, waits the man who will haunt German command for months. His name is Vasily Zaitsev, the Soviet sniper, turning Stalingrad into a hunting ground for German officers. Because in this city, one bullet can decide the fate of a regiment.
In the summer of 1942, the German advance carved a brutal path across the Soviet Union. After the rapid gains of the previous year's Operation Barbarossa, Hitler launched a renewed offensive, Case Blue, aimed at securing the oil fields of the Caucasus and cutting Soviet supply routes along the Volga River. At the heart of this strategy lay Stalingrad, not just a name, a symbol, a city that carried the Soviet leader's own identity. Losing it would be a humiliation the Red Army could not permit. By late August, waves of German bombers transformed Stalingrad into a wasteland. Factories, apartment blocks, and tram lines were reduced to shattered rubble. The civilian population was trapped, many forced into brutal street combat to defend their homes. The city became a maze of broken concrete, steel, and ash. The Germans believed victory was within reach. They pushed the Sixth Army under General Friedrich Paulus deep into the city's heart, expecting Soviet resistance to collapse. But Stalin issued Order Number 227, not one step back. Retreat was no longer an option. Blocking detachments stood ready to shoot deserters. Brutal, unforgiving combat followed. Entire battalions fought for single rooms. Sewers became command posts. Snipers lurked in every shadow. Grenades rolled down stairwells. Bayonet fights erupted in pitch-black basements. The Volga River, once a lifeline of trade, now served as a deadly channel for Soviet reinforcements crossing under relentless artillery fire. Many drowned or burned before ever reaching land, but those who made it were determined to hold on. German soldiers soon realized they were not facing an army ready to break. They were facing one willing to die on every street corner. From this hell emerged a new kind of warrior, the sniper, exploiting the chaotic terrain to strike without warning. Every ruined factory became a fortress, every floor a battlefield. It was in this crucible of desperation and defiance that a Siberian hunter named Vasily Grigoryevich Zaitsev arrived, ready to apply a lifetime of instinct to the survival of his nation. And the Red Army would soon discover what a single skilled marksman could do to the German advance. Vasily Zaitsev had grown up far from the industrial roar of Stalingrad. Born in the remote Siberian village of Yeleninskoye, he learned to shoot early, not as a sport, but a necessity. Hunting in the Ural foothills, stalking deer and wolves across frozen expanses, he trained his eyes to detect the slightest movement. One shot had to feed a family. One mistake could cost a life. When Germany invaded in June 1941, Zaitsev volunteered for the Navy, serving as a clerk in the Pacific Fleet. But paperwork could not hold a man built for the hunt. He demanded to be sent where the war was burning hottest, the Eastern Front. By the fall of 1942, he stepped off a barge into the inferno of Stalingrad, a humble rifleman of the 62nd Army under General Vasily Chuiplov. What he saw stunned even a hardened Siberian. Factories once producing tractors now hammered out T-34 tanks in sight of the enemy. Soldiers fought in the upper floors while assembly lines ran below. Civilians too stubborn to evacuate carried ammunition through bomb craters. Every living soul in Stalingrad was part of the defense. Snipers played a new and devastating role. The chaotic landscape favored those who could disappear into debris and strike from impossible angles. German commanders trained for sweeping maneuvers and rapid advances were forced to lead small groups through narrow kill zones. A single bullet placed well could unravel an entire assault. Zaitsev quickly proved exceptional. Armed initially with a standard Mosin-Nagant rifle, he positioned himself among ruins and shattered glass, sometimes waiting hours for a single shot. His precision was instinctive. No wasted ammunition, no missed opportunities. His superiors took notice. Soon he was issued the Mosin-Nagant M90-30 with a PU scope, the iconic Soviet sniper rifle of the war. His mission sharpened: target officers, artillery observers, and machine gun crews, the brains of the enemy. German units began losing leadership faster than they could replace it. Confusion spread. Soviet morale surged. Zaitsev was not just hunting. He was surgically dismantling the German chain of command. Word spread rapidly through the ranks. His skill became a beacon of hope and an invitation to others. Zaitsev helped establish a sniper school amid the ruins, training ordinary soldiers into silent predators. His principles focused on patience, deception, and teamwork. Use the battlefield's every shadow. Move only when unseen. Stay invisible, even after the kill. Let fear do half the work. From rooftops, shell craters, and burned-out rail cars, a new generation began to stalk the invaders. By December 1942, the Germans realized they were being watched by eyes they could not find and killed by hands they could not reach. Stalingrad was becoming a city ruled by the sights of Soviet snipers, with Zaitsev as the deadliest of them all.
Fear became the most common companion for German infantry in Stalingrad. Soldiers who once marched confidently across Europe now crawled through rubble, terrified of the invisible hunter watching from the shadows. Every ruined window, every shattered pipe, every tiny opening held the possibility of a Soviet sniper's scope. Vasily Zaitsev turned this fear into a weapon. He studied the habits of German officers, the way they pointed, how they carried their map cases, how they scanned the rooftops before advancing. They were always the first to lead, the first to observe, the first to expose themselves. And they became the first to die. Zaitsev used deception as skillfully as he used his rifle. He crafted decoys from helmets and sticks, placing them in exposed positions to draw enemy fire. As soon as a German sniper revealed himself, Zaitsev would strike. He blended perfectly into the dust and debris, changing positions constantly, ensuring that even after a shot, no one could find him. He rarely spoke during missions. His breathing slowed, his heartbeat steadied. Patience guided every decision. A single bullet could stop an entire assault. A single well-placed shot could paralyze a regiment. German troops whispered his name, sometimes as a warning, sometimes as a curse. They believed he could see through walls, that he never missed, and that he chose his targets hours before they dared to stand. That fear reached far beyond bullets. For the Soviets, Zaitsev became a symbol of control and confidence in a battle that seemed to swallow men whole. Soldiers fighting in basements and factories thanked him without words. Every time a German officer fell, they knew the unseen hunter had struck again. He was more than a sniper. He was a reminder that precision still had a place in the chaos. Zaitsev knew exactly what he was doing, not just killing the enemy, but dismantling the structure that guided them. When an officer fell, the troops hesitated. When a machine gunner was removed, the firing stopped. When a radio operator went silent, the front dissolved into confusion. He wasn't just fighting Germans. He was attacking the very idea of German momentum. But his success carried weight. Every life he ended was a deliberate choice. Each trigger pull was a decision made with clarity and consequences. Snipers lived with the knowledge that their battles were personal, intimate, and unforgettable. Still, Zaitsev embraced the responsibility.
War demanded results, and he delivered them without hesitation, because hesitation meant death. In Stalingrad, morality was measured in survival, and survival required removing threats before they could act. By late 1942, it became obvious the German army was not just losing ground, it was losing confidence. The hunter had turned the city into a trap, and the Germans were desperate for someone who could stop him. Their answer would arrive soon. A man rumored to be the deadliest marksman in Berlin, dispatched to eliminate the Soviet sniper who had become a legend.
Zaitsev's achievements did not remain a front-line secret for long. The Soviet Union needed hope and heroes. His name, once known only within a rifle company, began appearing in army reports, then proudly broadcast across the nation. Newspapers celebrated his growing tally. Young recruits whispered his stories as proof that the enemy was not invincible. Zaitsev felt uneasy with fame, but he understood its purpose. If his reputation could strengthen a soldier's resolve, then his story became another weapon in the defense of Stalingrad. General Vasily Zaitsev recognized exactly what Zaitsev represented. He was proof that the Red Army could dominate, not by numbers alone, but with skill and adaptation. Snipers were now key figures in Zaitsev's brutal doctrine: force the Germans to fight every meter, pay for every step forward with blood. When German troops hesitated to lead assaults because their officers were being singled out, Zaitsev considered it a victory. When radios fell silent and machine guns stopped firing, he knew a sniper had made the difference. Every shot that Zaitsev fired strengthened the Soviet position. Across the lines, German high command traced patterns of casualties back to one man. Soldiers spoke of a phantom sniper, a deadly predator who saw every movement through a telescopic eye. Patrols were ambushed. Counter-snipers simply vanished. Commanders resorted to crawling, desperate to avoid standing tall. Zaitsev listened, observed, and adapted. He constantly changed positions, leaving no clue behind. He kept meticulous records, not to boast, but to analyze how the enemy behaved and how best to attack them again. He also refused to fight alone. Among the ruins, he began training ordinary riflemen into stealthy hunters like himself. Through patience and harsh discipline, he created a force from scratch. Each graduate carried lessons carved into muscle memory: silence, observation, discipline, and absolute focus on critical targets. One by one, his students disappeared into bombed-out factories and twisted metal. Many would become snipers of fearsome skill, contributing hundreds more kills to the defense of Stalingrad. Zaitsev was no longer just a threat. He was multiplying. The impact rippled across the entire 6th German Army. What once looked like a certain victory now felt like walking blind into a trap. Every window could hide death. Every mound of debris could be a firing position. Daylight was dangerous. Night brought no comfort. But the weight of the hunt pressed on Zaitsev as well. The concentration, the waiting, the knowledge that every bullet struck a man with a family, a voice, a memory. These thoughts lingered in quiet moments. Yet war allowed no space for hesitation. Germany had invaded his home. Loved ones were dying everywhere. The Volga ran red with sacrifice. To save Stalingrad, he had to continue the hunt. And still, the Germans refused to accept defeat. If Zaitsev was terrorizing their army, they would respond with equal precision. Word filtered through Soviet reconnaissance. A master sniper from Berlin had arrived specifically to kill him. A man praised for his skill, feared for his discipline. The greatest hunter in Stalingrad was about to become prey. Soon, one of the most famous sniper duels in history would begin. A contest fought not in open fields, but among shadows, silence, and shattered concrete.
Winter deepened its grip on Stalingrad.
The temperature plunged below freezing, frost gripping every brick and steel beam. The Volga became a shifting sheet of ice, cracked by artillery blasts. The city was no longer just destroyed. It was suffocating beneath winter's weight. For Zaitsev, the cold meant sharper focus. Breath slowed naturally. Movement from the enemy became easier to spot against the stillness. But it also meant the Germans were becoming desperate. Every failed assault cost them officers, morale, and time. It was then that the rumor became truth. A German sniper, a master marksman, had arrived to eliminate him. The man's identity remains debated by historians. Soviet accounts named him Major Erwin Koenig, an instructor from the German sniper school in Berlin. German records never confirmed such a figure. Some suggest he may have been SS officer Heinz Torvald. Others believe the story evolved into legend. But in Stalingrad, none of that mattered. What mattered was that Zaitsev felt another hunter watching him. Soviet scouts found signs, dead soldiers with precise bullet wounds, shot from concealed angles, counter-snipers who never returned from missions, a creeping awareness that the battlefield's balance had shifted. Zaitsev could sense it. The German wasn't hunting infantry. He was hunting him. The duel began silently. Shots rang out at positions Zaitsev had used before. Decoys were destroyed before they could even draw fire. Each side studied the terrain relentlessly. The twisted rail yard, the shattered factory walls, the chimneys that pierced gray skies like watchtowers. The game became one of patience and nerve. Zaitsev and his spotter, Nikolai Kulikov, spent hours scanning rubble, searching for a flash of light on glass or the faintest shift of shadow. They slept little. They barely spoke. Every minute was a test of discipline against fatal curiosity. Days passed without progress. Then, along a factory line known to soldiers simply as the pipe, Kulikov spotted something suspicious. A sheet of metal placed in the open, too perfect, too intentional. A decoy. The German had created a false target to lure them into exposing themselves. This was no ordinary marksman. Only a master would understand this deception well. Zaitsev studied the environment, mapping lines of sight. The decoy wasn't the real threat. It was bait. And the true sniper had to be somewhere with a view of that position. Zaitsev evaluated every angle, every potential vantage point. His instincts finally fixed on a dusty steel plate, partially buried under rubble, just enough room beneath it for a sniper's muzzle and scope. He did not take the shot, not yet. He and Kulikov waited through hours of silence. No wind, no movement. Just two hunters locked in a deadly stalemate. In the ruined heart of Stalingrad, this was no longer a battle of armies. It was a contest of mind, patience grinding against patience, discipline against discipline. The first mistake would decide who walked away and who would lie forever beneath frozen steel.
The frozen air stung their lungs as Zaitsev and Kulikov prepared for the final trap. They had confirmed it. The German sniper, whoever he truly was beneath that steel plate, waiting for the slightest mistake. A clever position, almost invisible, chosen by a man who understood patience as well as Zaitsev. The duel had become a contest of willpower. Hours blended into a blur of tension. Hands went numb, but neither marksman dared shift. Zaitsev knew the German would eventually have to act, and he would exploit that moment. They created a diversion. Kulikov exposed a helmet at the end of his rifle, raising it slowly above a parapet, shaking slightly as though a tired soldier were preparing to peek out. A dangerous move, but necessary. The metal plate across the ruins remained still. Minutes passed. Silence. Then a single glint of glass. The German had taken the bait.
watching for movement. Zaitsev kept his eye fixed on the steel plate, waiting for the exact angle. He whispered calm, measured breathing. His finger rested lightly on the trigger of his Mosin Nagant, a weapon that had defined countless Soviet victories from the shadows. Kulikov lifted the helmet further, exposing more head. This time the German fired. The bullet tore into the helmet, ripping it clean off the rifle. Snow and dust leapt into the air. The shot revealed the sniper's exact location for less than a heartbeat, but for Zaitsev, it was enough. He didn't hesitate. His rifle cracked through the frozen quiet, recoil pushing into his shoulder. The bullet struck beneath the steel plate, ricocheting inside the cramped burrow where the German lay hidden. Silence returned, but now it feels final. With Kulikov covering him, Zaitsev crawled across the broken yard, slipping through debris until he reached the plate. Carefully, he lifted it and found the German's body. The duel was over. The greatest threat to Soviet snipers in Stalingrad lay dead in the dirt. Whether his name was Koenig, Thorvald, or another elite sent by desperation, his fate was the same. He was outmatched by Zaitsev's patience and precision. News of the victory spread quickly through Soviet lines. Soldiers cheered the triumph of their silent defender. For the Germans, it was a chilling message. Even their best could not survive the ruins of Stalingrad. But while this legendary duel became the centerpiece of Zaitsev's fame, the war was far from won. Paulus's Sixth Army still occupied nearly half the city. Fighting continued in every blasted street. Snipers like Zaitsev pushed the enemy deeper into confusion, but the Red Army needed a decisive break, and one was coming. Far from the snipers' hideouts, Soviet forces were encircling the Germans in a massive operation, Uranus, a counterstrike that would trap the invaders inside their own battlefield. Zaitsev's bullet had claimed more than a single enemy sniper. It had helped crush the final German hope of regaining control. The tide in Stalingrad was turning, and the consequences would reshape the entire war.
The tide of war in Stalingrad shifted with brutal certainty. While Zaitsev and his fellow snipers waged a silent campaign among the ruins, the Red Army executed a far grander strategy above and around them. On November 19, 1942, Soviet forces launched Operation Uranus, a massive pincer assault designed to trap the German Sixth Army inside the city they had nearly conquered. The German commanders never expected the counterattack. They believed Soviet strength was concentrated solely in Stalingrad's center, not realizing powerful reserves waited across the steppe. Romanian and Hungarian troops guarding the German flanks crumbled against the unexpected offensive. Within days, a steel vise closed around Paulus's army. The hunters had become the hunted. From that moment onward, the German position deteriorated rapidly. Supplies dwindled. Ammunition became scarce. Food rationing turned into starvation. Wounded men froze to death on stretchers. A collapse once unthinkable now felt inevitable. Inside the besieged city, Zaitsev kept fighting. His tally of confirmed kills climbed above 200. Many of them officers and specialists whose absence crippled German operations. His students added hundreds more, forming a sniper network that choked the remaining German movement. Stalingrad's ruin became a graveyard of precision. The Germans could barely raise a periscope without risking a bullet. Yet the Soviet defenders were suffering too. Frostbite ravaged their limbs. Ammunition was scavenged from the dead. Soldiers lived in holes carved beneath rubble, eating frozen rations and melting snow for water. The Volga crossings remained deadly, swept by enemy fire. Victory, when it came, would not feel like triumph. It would feel like survival. In late December, Zaitsev suffered a devastating injury. A mortar shell detonated near his position, sending fragments into his face. Temporary blindness threatened to end the vision that guided every decisive shot he had taken.
He was rushed across the Volga for emergency treatment. For weeks, he lay in darkness, unsure whether he would ever see again. But Soviet doctors performed delicate surgery on his damaged eyes, and gradually his sight returned. Not fully at first, but enough that he could once again recognize the outlines of the world he had fought to defend. It was news from the front that finally eased his mind. Paulus's army had been completely encircled. The Germans were on the brink of collapse. Zaitsev's role was not finished, but the city he had protected was finally turning from victim to victor. As January approached, the final chapter of Stalingrad began, one that would bury the invaders beneath the snow and seal the fate of the Eastern Front.
January 1943 brought a silence unfamiliar to Stalingrad. Not peace, but exhaustion. The once relentless German assault had slowed to a crawl. Soldiers who had marched across continents now huddled in frozen cellars, starving and diseased. The Luftwaffe could no longer deliver supplies in the numbers needed. Entire battalions surrendered without orders. General Friedrich Paulus, surrounded and hopeless, faced the unthinkable. Hitler demanded victory or death, but Paulus chose survival for the remnants of his army. On January 31, 1943, he surrendered in the southern sector of the city. Days later, the last pockets of resistance were crushed. The city was liberated, but liberation looked like jagged ruins and tens of thousands of corpses buried beneath the snow. Zaitsev returned to Stalingrad after his recovery, one of many soldiers who walked through what remained of a city they barely recognized. Among the ruins, he was greeted as a hero, not for propaganda alone, but for the very real lives he saved through every precise pull of the trigger. History recorded 242 confirmed German kills attributed to him. Some accounts claim his total topped 400, but Zaitsev never boasted. Numbers could not capture the weight of what he had done. After the battle, his sniper school expanded into a full doctrine. Young marksmen across the Soviet Union learned the lessons forged in Stalingrad's rubble. Snipers became a cornerstone of Red Army tactics for the rest of the war. The Germans, once dismissive, were now painfully aware of their importance as well. The psychological effects endured long after the battle ended. German survivors carried memories of every movement being watched, every exposed moment a gamble. Officers led from shadows, no longer daring to command from the front. For Zaitsev, fame brought recognition, but not comfort. Medals were pinned to his chest. Citizens thanked him with tears in their eyes. Yet he understood that his legacy was built on lives taken. Even necessary justice leaves scars. When the war ended, he returned briefly to civilian life, quiet, reserved, seeking to leave the battlefield behind. But conflict returned in Korea, and he served again, applying the same discipline that carried him through Stalingrad. He eventually settled into peace as an engineer, living far from propaganda spotlights, but history refused to forget him. Streets were named after him. A grave in Stalingrad, now Volgograd, honors his service. In 2006, nearly half a century after his death, his remains were reinterred there, fulfilling his final wish, to rest among the soldiers he fought beside. Zaitsev's story endures not as myth, but as testament, a reminder that one man, with discipline and purpose, can shift the trajectory of a seemingly unstoppable enemy. The German defeat at Stalingrad was a turning point in the Second World War, and among all the tanks, artillery, and armies, a single sniper played a role that echoed far beyond the barrel of his rifle. The war moved on to new fronts, but the lessons learned in Stalingrad would forever reshape the future of combat, where silence, patience, and a single shot could decide the fate of nations.
Stalingrad remains one of the darkest crucibles in human history, a place where entire armies broke, where cities were reduced to ruins,
and where survival became the only measure of victory. Amid that devastation, Vasily Zaitsev emerged not as a larger-than-life legend, but as a soldier shaped by necessity. His skill turned shattered buildings into high ground. His patience transformed silence into strategy. His rifle became the balance point on which fear and hope were measured. Yet behind every confirmed kill lay a truth that Zaitsev never ignored. War is built on tragedy. The men he targeted were not faceless monsters. They were opponents equally bound by orders, fear, and duty. His bullets did not just strike flesh, they struck the fragile structure of human leadership, changing the path of battles one decision at a time. Zaitsev proved that the power of a single individual can ripple through history. He showed that precision can challenge might, and that resolve can endure even in ruins. His legacy is not simply the number of enemies he eliminated. It is the doctrine he inspired and the soldiers he trained who carried his lessons into future wars. Stalingrad rose from its ashes. The world moved forward, but the echoes of those silent shots still resonate, because in that frozen city on the Volga, one man turned the chaos of war into a deadly art and reminded the world that sometimes the greatest influence belongs to the unseen.